But let's start at the very beginning. You first launched TNA with this Wednesday pay-per-view opportunity. Eventually, you wind up landing a deal on Fox Sports Net. You create Impact. And now Victory Road is going to be the first more traditional pay-per-view. And it makes the newsletters that you feel like you need more star power for this 3-hour extravaganza known as Victory Road. Was Kevin Nash and Scott Hall, were they just, you knew they had star power and they were friends of yours, so maybe it might be a little easier to get a deal there? Or what's the thinking there between, because it's credited as being your idea in the newsletters. Is that
Well,
right?
yeah, I mean, when look at the research and recalling a lot of this, and man, there's so much as we're going to get into the episode when Dusty comes a part of this story, and he's booking, and then he's a part of the team, and then there's some questions in there that I don't think I'm going to have all the answers as far as some creative things, but as I got done with the research and then I kind of stepped back into it, like I feel like I almost have to share this because of the kind of the understanding of me and Kevin's relationship. And it goes without saying, when you come up with the guy, and I'm not saying come up, but Kevin got to the WWF, I think 93. I got there into 93. But in 94, me and Kevin, we traveled a lot together. And this is how far back we go. And again, I think it gives a much deeper understanding of our relationship, the ups and the downs and everything. I think the very first conversation I can ever recall having with Kevin is about the show Friends. And I was in an aisle seat in Coach, and Kevin was in an aisle seat in Coach. I think that is a pretty good jumping off point, that's where we were both at in our careers before he became champion and before he got first. But we traveled the roads and roomed together and work out together. Kevin gave me a book called Heavy Duty by one of the Mincer brothers on their concept of training. To this day, I basically kind of use a lot of those same principles. So Kevin was a mentor to me in the gym as far as working out. He, along with obviously Scott, we're going to talk about obviously Sean too, but they mentored me so many ways on we'll call it the WWF way of things during the time. So fast forward to I think this is 06, 07 when we're transitioning from the weekly pay-per-views to monthlies.
04, September 04.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Wow. That's okay. So fast forward 04. That's man. Okay. September of 04, we're doing the transition. And yes, Conrad, we and collectively, I was leading the charge, definitely thought we wanted as much star power as possible. We were on Fox Sports Net, and we knew the challenges of the time slot. Friday afternoon at 3:00, 4 Eastern. So Fridays at 4 Eastern on Fox Sports Net. We knew that was challenging. And I remember having the conversations to Dixie, to Bob Carter, to my father. And I always kind of led those conversations when talking about Kevin in that you know, and this is another thing, Conrad. Maybe I'd love a little feedback on this. When you think of the NWO, and that is a super positive thing, but it also, the NWO was bigger than Kevin, bigger than Scott, bigger than Hulk. When it got hot, it super shattered. But do you really look at Kevin as a WWF guy or a WCW guy? Now, I think you look at him as it. I think the NWO transcended that, and we all know the legends of the T-shirts everywhere, and there for a period of time they were bigger than the business. And I think Stone Cold and Austin 316 had transcended. It got into just so much more than water cooler talk. But in having those conversations with people internally, that was how a lot of it that I led. I'm like, hey man, at the end of the day, you take any one of the three, and I believe this. I think if you took Hogan out of that, it wouldn't be the same. I can say the exact same thing. If you took Scott out, Kevin out that, because those guys jumping from the WWF to WCW were, not to rehash the story, but it was the North invading the South. It was the Yankees invading the Red Sox, the Lakers and Celtics, and whatever rivalry you want to call. But that positioning of them in the business to this day, and Conrad, up until I left that company, but you probably have at least a little more access than I do. But I know what the NWO merchandise sales do to this day, and they're the very, very top. And Kevin, again, the foundation of that. And so I, going into that first monthly pay-per-view, and knew we were going to be doing it every month, I wanted a Kevin Nash. And I know in the history of TNA, we talk about Sting and the licensing and the brand awareness and the international component that he brought. We talk about Kurt Angle when we got him. But getting Scott and Kevin in these early days, as far as name recognition, was a big deal. And that's exactly how, when I had those internal talks with Bob Carter and my father and Dixie, to a lesser degree during this time, it was important. And that's how I viewed it.
Yeah, I view him as a WCW guy. I know that most people listening to this would argue against that and say, "Oh no, he first got hot into the WWF." I get that, but not a lot of people were watching. But when he jumped ship and started the NWO, one of the foundation members there, that's really what set the business on fire, and I think carried him. People used to sort of throw dirt on Kevin's name and say, "Oh, he's the worst drawing champion of all time." Oh yeah, how did he draw in WCW? Pretty good. The business and the creative and the entire industry was down when he was champ in 1994, 1995. But when it's up, he's there at the tippy top. So I don't think maybe history has been fair to him in that regard. But I do view him, for better or worse, as a WCW guy. And I think most people do, which is why when you started to use the term outsiders on your television promos, of course, the buzz starts to come around. Just to give context, too, here in 2004, this is before you have the big television contract. Yes, you have the Fox Sportsnet deal, but that's like in the middle of the freaking afternoon. And there's discussion that, hey, maybe we're going to try to buy prime time or late night spots on the weekend, but we're still trying to make this a viable company, make this a solvent company. And we're not quite there yet. And there's lots of rumor and innuendo that, hey, unless they raid WWE or land someone like Hulk Hogan or Ric Flair or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, that doesn't seem possible. But Hulk Hogan is not on the docket. Scott Hall and Kevin Nash are. And Wade Keller would write this: Kevin Nash and Scott Hall and maybe even Sean Waltman arriving in TNA can create a buzz, but beyond that, what can they do? In the ring, maybe not much, but they could still have plenty of positive impact if they're up for it. If we've learned one thing about Hall and Nash over the past few years, it's that together they mean much more than they do separately. There's something about those two when they're together that disappears completely when working alone. They play well off of working with each other. The problem is, neither are in wrestling shape anymore. Their in-ring careers are, for all intents and purposes, over. However, if they have Waltman with them and he gets himself in ring shape on some indie shows beforehand, he can be the member of the trio who handles the bumping. If Jeff Jarrett wrestles Jeff Hardy in a rematch in November, that would mean Hall, Nash, and Waltman could initially get involved with the 3 Live crew, which is Conan, BG James, and Ron Killings. There is a good connection with Waltman and James due to their days in DX together. There's a connection with Conan since he was in the NWO with Hall, Nash, and Waltman. They could work 6-man tags at the pay-per-view, and the stip being that one scores a pinfall and gets an NWA title match, and the loser of the pinfall can never wrestle for the world title. Waltman could work the entirety of the match, et cetera, et cetera. So there's lots of fantasy booking of, hey, if they're going to bring them in, here's how it could work. And there was a lot of chatter. And if we know anything about Jeff Jarrett, it's that he loves when there's a lot of chatter. Why were Kevin Nash and Scott Hall some of the first phone calls you made, and how receptive were they?
Well, super. I mean, look, that's why I wanted to kind of lead off, is that we had a personal relationship. We were buddies, and I'd worked with him in WWF as Diesel and Razor. I worked him in WCW the whole, whatever you want to call it, the Millionaires Club, until it went out of business. We were there, and again, we were buddies, and now here comes an opportunity. Scott lived half hour, Kevin under an hour, maybe 45 minutes. They were close to Orlando. It's not like I was asking them to get on a plane and fly halfway across the country and work 30-minute matches. I wanted them to be a part of the product. And look, they're both businessmen. They got paid under their market value, but they wanted to get paid. But they also, during this time frame, that's why I want to kind of be specific. As time went on, especially Kevin, it became much more, okay, I'm committing, I'm going to get paid. Hey, Jeff, I understand, and you understand that you don't have to buy a plane ticket, and you don't even have to buy a hotel room. So that alone, comparatively speaking to all the talent here, I'm a first class ticket. So just right out of the gate, my market value works. And so anyway, they were coming to help a buddy during these early days, and those guys are what, Conrad, 4 years removed from being the biggest box out, or a part of the biggest box out attractions in the entire business. So hell yeah, I want them to be a part of the company, and knew with I'll call it our core, America's Most Wanted, Team Canada, AJ, Chris Daniels, the low keys of the world, Samoa Joe wasn't there yet, but we had a nucleus of talent that we needed some box office attractions, and I'll call it quote unquote from the WCW era, because we're only 3 years removed from that, to help us create brand awareness. And they did. They absolutely did. The folks at Fox Sports, when I'm having those conversations, and no disrespect to our current roster at the time, they just didn't know anybody. Did they know a Jeff Hardy? Oh God, yeah. He was just on this TV, and those guys knew. We're going to get into some conversations about the best damn sports show, period. Their producers just obviously knew who Kevin Nash and Scott Hall were. So that's just comes part of building any brand. You got to bring some brand with you to build your own brand, and that's where we were at. That's where we were at in 04.